The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson. Hello and welcome to History with Jackson, the home of accessible and digestible history. And welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series, where we'll be talking to some of the historians, living historians and performers here at Chalke about what they're doing at the festival and their work. Now, Chalke History Festival will be covered comprehensively through History with Jackson, be it on our social media, our blog, and our podcast. So if you wanted to check out more and learn more about what's happening at Chalke, do head to the links in the description below. Now, without further ado, I'll leave you to our Chalke History Festival special series episode. Hello and welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series here on History with Jackson. And today we're joined by Matthew Longo. How you doing, Matthew?
I'm great. What a beautiful day to be in the countryside.
Oh, it's absolutely stunning. And we've had to put sunglasses on. It's that bright.
Yeah, exactly. I have many experiences in the countryside. They're not always sunny, so you take it when you get it.
Yeah, we can just thank God it's not raining.
Yeah, right.
But you've got a talk here at Chalke called The Picnic, based on your book, The Picnic. What inspired you to tell this tale?
So the completely honest answer, I'm a border nerd by training. My first book was about the US-Mexico border. I'm not a Europeanist, I'm not even a historian. My background's in political science. But I was in the Hungarian borderlands at a borders conference, because that's what border geeks do. We have conferences at borders. Shouldn't be surprising, actually, but in a way it's a level of geekiness that's somehow startling. We actually hold our conferences often in a city on one side of a border and then visit the border and finish the conference on the other side. Okay. I was giving a talk on the US-Mexico border, and this particular year, this particular conference was set between Vienna and Budapest. And I took a trip to the border, and I was on the lunch queue in the middle of a field, not that different from Chalke, and I met an old Hungarian man that said, "You want to hear the story of this border?" I said, sure, and I'm on a queue. What are you going to say? You can't get rid of him. And I said, sure, tell me about it. And he told me this magical tale. And I thought, oh man, I need to pursue this. I need to figure this out. I have to go meet these people. And it really has spun off, and it's been half a decade of my life now pursuing this story.
And I love conferences and I love going to them, but that sounds like an amazing conference, going over the border, back and forth. I love that. That's probably the best sounding conference I've ever heard of. But then, you talk about 1989 and borrowing a term from Francis Fukuyama at the end of history. Yep. Why is this moment seen as the end of history, particularly in Eastern Europe?
Yeah, so we have this idea that the world is cleanly divided between these two ideological systems. And the ideological systems we had in the East, we had something like Stalinism or authoritarianism or even just simply unfreedom, without getting into specifics. And in the West, you had freedom. We had liberalism and democracy and all these values. And so 89 was the rupture year, right, where the one was vanquished. And there's a simple rendering of that. It's all very Manichaean. It sounds like it's obvious that everything on one side and the other was homogeneous, and this moment cleaved an ideological system winning, therefore being proved better. So it was the end of history. The ideological wars that had dominated the 1,000 years prior were over. But of course, it's not that simple. And, parts of the book, of course, is about 89, but it's all a storytelling book, right? And it tracks the stories to the present. One of the interesting revelations is that all the things we thought about 89, it's not that they're all wrong. It's just so oversimplified as to be unhelpful. And that rupture year has completely not just structured the end of communism, but the complete change of the meaning of liberty and freedom and liberalism in the West. Without this ideological rival, what happened wasn't that communism just fell, it's that the West went into the East. It opened its markets, but it was also predatory in that sense, right? It took its markets, which changed the character of globalization. We know, economically, this led to the great rise in inequality you have in the West. All of it roots from this same moment. So the same day history ended, it was reborn, but in a different guise. And that guise is something we're all still grappling with. That's been one of the really interesting experiences of this research. I went in to study the 80s. I didn't realize I ended up spending half my time learning how the 80s prefigures our present.
Now, I find that really interesting, particularly the sentiment that it's also the rebirth of history in that moment. But I think a lot of us tend to get 1989 and the end of history kind of tied up in these big political figures, these big, what we might see as monoliths. But how does it affect the people?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so this whole history that I decided to tell, so it's a storytelling book. And most of the people are still living, although I will say this is kind of the end of that oral history moment. A lot of the people I interview, even since the start of the project, have since passed. I'd say about 4 or 5. Most of the people I interviewed are in their 70s or 80s. I mean, these are people who were in their 30s and 40s, 35 years ago. It's all ground up, right? It's trying to tell the end of the Cold War, not in Manichaean terms, not in the legacy of Gorbachev and Bush and all the things we know about in schools, all that kind of simplistic education we get. But I want to just toss something in there, which is that while it's also ground level, it's but lived experiences of people and stories and kids and all these things. It's also the middle level, which is that a lot of it has to do with us not understanding the importance of the middle rung of politicians, in this case, Hungarian leadership, who make all these kinds of decisions. Some of them are epic, and like so this Miklos Nemeth was the reformist prime minister of Hungary. His decision in May of '89 to start to reform the Iron Curtain is a big part of what precipitates the story. But on the other hand, you have all the other decisions of politicians to not persecute, to not clamp down, to look the other way. You know, it's a story of border guards putting down their guns and not enforcing a border. They should have been, or they were literally tasked, their whole adult lives, they've been tasked with defending. It's about border guards standing in the woods and often even putting up signs for refugees running through the woods with arrows showing where the border is. Right? It's all of these little ways in which people, even not at the lowest level, even within the administration of state, take history into their own hands, which is why this is a beautiful story and not a bloodbath. Frankly, this could have been like the most horrifying hour of the 20th century that turned into something spectacular because of those decisions. So now I'm quite invested in that kind of project of telling history. I'll give one little anecdote about how important Miklos Nemeth is. So I don't know what, I'm an American. I have an idea of what I learned in high school. I'm not totally sure what you learned in your high school. I think in this level it's quite similar, which is that we know so much about a figure like a Reagan or a figure like a Gorbachev. We know so much about a history told from the vantage of the giants, right? The perspective of the giants. To give you an idea how important Nemeth is to this history, this man that no one has ever heard of. Frankly, I've given a talk now around 4 or 5 different countries, and I'll often ask the room, who has heard of Miklos Nemeth? The answer is almost always no one. But the Germans know, because of course what happened in Hungary precipitated the fall of the Berlin Wall. And on the 20th anniversary, 2009, of the fall of the Berlin Wall in Berlin, they did a big ceremony. What they did is they put up giant foam dominoes along the whole extent of the wall. And they had 2 people push them, right? So that all the dominoes, signifying the end of the Iron Curtain, the end of the Cold War, fell dramatically in Berlin. One of the people that pushed them is Miklos Nemeth, right? These are these people that are forgotten. So there's just 2 sides of that coin, right? So the one is to say what matters is local people like any of us. But the other is to try to reclaim some of these voices that get lost that were so monumental.
No, I love that approach of trying to put people back into narratives where they've been lost, but also that history and politics and big IR and geopolitical moments can hinge on that soldier in the woods,
Right.
can hinge on the person who's not doing their job.
Right.
And it's a lovely moment. But then you talk about oral histories there.
Yeah, right.
You know, how important are oral histories in your work, in the way that you approach, you know, not only history but IR and geopolitics?
Yeah, I'm actually quite obsessed with it. You know, I'm not a historian by training. My background's actually political science, and my work that's academic is all ethnographic, right? So I have come from a very granular understanding of history. I don't have this big picture, and I've always kind of resisted it. So in a way, it's almost like an ethos for me, which is that I know the Cold War in monolithic terms, and frankly, any history that I know in those terms, I can tell you now, I could probably retell in a more interesting way just by looking at a couple instances of lived lives, But so that's kind of just the ethos point. I think on a way deeper level, what you get with interview culture, which can also be at the highest levels, but the higher the level, the less people say,
Yeah.
right? The more reserved, the higher the cost is to speaking. When you're dealing with people, most of my interviewees are like, 75-year-old Hungarian men who I would meet at 8 in the morning already drinking palinka, the local firewater, their version of brandy. And they'll tell you anything. Like, what are they holding back? But so you get these wild stories because people are unfiltered. So there is some truth that it matters the level at which we're speaking. At the highest levels, people don't speak in the same way. But what matters about the stories when they're earnest is you don't just get the action, you get the thought process. You get the fact that all these things, these decisions, have a moral calculus. I'll give you an example. So one of the main characters in my book is a man named Arpad Bela. He was the head border guard at the site of the picnic when all the East German refugees flooded the border at the site of the breach, who decided, although he was tasked with stopping them, to step aside. That's an incredible act. You could have told the book just with the act of essentially non-violent, non-resistance to the flood of change. But way more interesting is the experience of talking to him. But why? Why did he do this? And his answer is so fascinating. So why did he decide to let this, 1,000 people running at him pass? His words, almost word perfect. They were not enemies. They had prams, right? What he saw was children. The idea that the undergirding moral force wasn't actually this big ideological thing about systems and freedom and communism. Actually, it was a very small level moral decision that he couldn't bring himself to enforce the border because of the children. To fast forward 2 months, similar story in Berlin. The person there is Harold Jäger, the one faced with massive crowds saying tear down the wall. He was the one that opened the gate. Right? This is the same man, same position in a way. You ask him why. And his answer is, because I could never have faced my sister. Right? He never speaks in ideological terms. These big picture stories. He goes home. It happens late at night, 11. His sister's already asleep. She has no idea the whole world's changed. The Berlin Wall is over. This woman is woken up. This is back in the day where you couldn't turn off your cell phone, right? The phone rang, you woke up, right? So he calls on a landline, wakes his sister up at like 1 a.m. And she's like, what is this? Why are you calling? And he says, I opened the Berlin Wall. And his sister's question to him was, did you shoot anyone? Because they had had conversations about, or ideological differences. They had had discussions about what was really being enforced. And this point that to him, he needed to be able to look her in the eye is part of why he made that call. So that kind of thing you'd never get with the big politics. That's the kind of stuff that interests me.
Yeah, no, I love the human elements in history and people's moral ideas or their personal reasons for not doing something. It's incredibly interesting. Now, going down to a personal reason, you've been at Chalke yesterday and today.
Yeah.
Now, this site is massive. What has been your favourite thing that you've seen at Chalke so far?
It's been fantastic. I have spoken in front of many kinds of audiences, but almost always, because I teach at university, we're talking about university students and professors, or, frankly, septuagenarian history geeks that really want to relive the bad old days of the Cold War, half of whom have a story about the time they crossed Checkpoint Charlie in 1965 or whatever, But at Chalke, I've had the chance to give a talk to schools kids. And these students, we're talking 15 or so, I don't know the ages, but roughly 15-year-olds, were so excited and so into it that I find it totally inspiring. And being able to tell a story that involves, frankly, young people and the politics of change and how, basically people out in the middle of nowhere, the peripheries, in this case of Hungary, but could be anywhere, could have an idea face up against something literally impossible. I mean, the Iron Curtain, the idea that you could change the ideological structure of the world, it's unimaginable. And yet, like the idiom of the little pebble in a pool, this pebble drops because of these kids doing something radical. They threw a party on the Iron Curtain. These radical ideas end up having all these ripple effects that are so palpably changing the world. To be able to say that, obviously it's great to say that to a 65-year-old, because of course we all care about the story. But to say it to a 15-year-old, you actually see the light bulb go off. There's a kind of excitement, and they're so engaged and so riveted by this idea. I find that so moving. Yeah. And so this was like what I had at Chalke. I've never had before, frankly.
I know those light bulb moments, really to me, they're like, oh, this is the reason why I'm doing it. I love it. Yeah.
100%.
Well, where can people grab a copy of your book, The Picnic?
Yeah, fantastic. So, frankly, bookstores anywhere. It's called The Picnic, A Dream of Freedom and the Collapse of the Iron Curtain. The publisher in America, if you have an American audience, is Norton. Publisher in England is Bodleyhead. Any Waterstones, any foils, it's there, big yellow cover. A man is an image of a man in the height of euphoria crossing the border. You can't miss it.
And then if people want to interact with you and ask you questions online, where can they find you?
I am very active, probably to my detriment, on Twitter. I would be better as a person if I was less active, but I'm very reachable on Twitter. Also email, of course, but Twitter's where I tend to have the big splayed out chats and debates and fun having, even if slightly time wasting, but whatever.
Oh, fantastic.
Such is life.
Well, we'll make sure the link for those in the description so people can go grab a copy and interact with you.
Love that.